The turn of the millennium has heralded a lot of promising possibilities for Canadian game developer Digital Extremes. Founded in 1993, the small studio based in London, Ontario began their stride developing pinball games. During that time, founder and CEO James Schmaltz showed off a prototype engine that renders graphics in 3D to his publisher and friend Tim Sweeney, CEO of Epic Games. It is meek to say that Sweeney was impressed by the showcase. Hyperbolically, it became the proverbial Big Bang that launched a long-time collaboration between the two companies that eventually materialized in the first iteration of the widely renowned Unreal Engine, as well as debuting the first game that would run on it, Unreal, in 1998. To say the least, the game was a great success, commercially and critically, and a year later they would follow up this success by releasing one of the most renowned arena shooters that would become galvanized among of the greats in its genre within gaming's zeitgeist, Unreal Tournament. Overall, it is safe to say that the year 1999 looked to be on the up and up for DE. Although not necessarily the architects that had built the technical backbones of the Unreal Engine, the studio displayed an aptitude for the more artistic aspect of game development, mostly involved in handling the front end of his games, from narrative, environment, maps, and overall presentation. They were dreamers, and they dreamt big. And as the world closed the book on the 20th century and unfolded its opening chapter of the 21st, Digital Extremes announced their dream to the world as early as February 2000. It was called Dark Sector, an MMO that would expand on the world of Unreal Tournament. It was going to be a universe where mankind has conquered the solar system, only for that conquest to spiral down to turmoil and conflict, where players would take on the role of morally ambiguous bounty hunters with the agency to decide whether they wish to take on contracts to tame the chaos or capitalize on it by becoming assassins, profiting off of the heads of innocents, suffering the consequence of accruing bounties on their own head, making them fair games for others to pursue. It would be a universe where players can unite into syndicates to commit deeds of fair or foul, where they could test their mettle in Unreal Tournament-style arenas, either as an individual or a squad for cash or prestige, in a background of war taking place across a myriad of environments. Above the red sands of Mars, beneath the amber skies of Jupiter, within the icy mines of Europa, or even among the stars scuttling in frantic space dogfights. It was a very ambitious concept, doubly so for its time, and nothing of fruition would materialize in its earlier years, save for few concept arts. Digital Extremes at the time was still in collaboration with Epic Games, working on creating the follow-ups for Unreal Tournament from 2002 through 2004. By that time, both studios grew in size, and this made the collaboration between them much more difficult. And despite ideas of combining the two studios into one entity surfaced, the reality of its feasibility has caused the thought to be quickly returned to earth, due to the caveat that the merger would have involved paying a hefty tax to the Canadian government. So coming at a crossroads, the two companies gave a sturdy handshake and parted ways, with Epic partnering up with Microsoft to work on the Gears of War franchise, and Digital Extremes focusing on making Dark Sector into a tangible reality. However, during development, the MMO angle was quietly scrapped, as the project shifted to what was described as Metal Gear in space. In 2005, DE developed a tech demo for the game to fish for a publisher. However, the timing of this endeavor couldn't be worse. As the twilight of gaming's 7th gen was on the horizon, the general cost of game development had been on a rising trajectory, which in turn has made publishers more risk averse, settling for a mindset of chasing trends rather than bold creativity. And despite DE's pedigree and solid demo, the publishers had no faith in Dark Sector's sci-fi theme whatsoever, believing the genre had lost its luster in marketability to a wider demographic and didn't guarantee profitable sales. Steve Sinclair, project lead of Dark Sector, now Digital Extreme's CEO at the time of writing, described that phase as the company's dark period, recalling how he would travel between the West Coast and Europe, pitching the game and consistently being met with rejections over rejections, summing up the ordeal, in his words, as creatively upsetting and soul destroying. But it was not all in vain. Publishers were still impressed by the technical prowess that DE illustrated in their demo, and instead offered them work for hire contracts. Digital Extremes, aware that they cannot be living on their Unreal royalties forever, needed an avenue to keep their lights on, so they took on these opportunities. A decision that is seemingly accepted with a heavy heart by how Sinclair described what work for hire is to him.
Work for hire is, we're going to pay you a lot to grow an extreme amount to your breaking limit, so you have all these people to take care of with their families, their mortgages, and their hopes and dreams. We're going to pay you just enough to get to the end of the project. You better pray it earns out so you can get your royalties back.
I personally love the way he puts this into perspective, how it highlights the reality of financial survivability taking precedence over creative passion within the industry. And back then, the notion of crowdfunding was not a prevalent lucrative alternative from publisher funding, and digital storefronts such as Steam hadn't yet revolutionized game distribution as we know today. At the time, if a game was to be shipped and marketed to a wide audience, it had to be physical and find its way on store shelves. And the addition of marketing and development costs resulted in a bill that is hefty for a lone studio to shoulder without the support of additional financial investment. The trade-off, of course, is the prospect of publisher meddling and visionary interference. Both Schmalz and Sinclair were vocal about their lack of fondness working through that period, expressing how the work for hire model has adopted them to bloat their team during a project, and then laying many off as soon as the contract is about to run out. This weighed heavily on Schmalz, expressing his awareness of dealing with the harsh reality of being the only active game studio in London, Ontario at the time. This meant the workers he would let go would have no alternative but to uproot and leave town if they wished to find work elsewhere in the same career. And so, in order to avoid leaving people stranded, the leadership at Digital Extremes did what they could to keep the contracts rolling in, and this meant Dark Sector's development would keep being stalled. After parting ways with Epic, DE partnered with Canadian publisher Groove Media, releasing Pariah in 2005 and its spiritual successor Warpath in the following year. Both games sold poorly to mixed and lukewarm reviews. And this lack of success has only increased the weight of the financial pressure above Digital Extremes' head. Yet, determined to finish Dark Sector, Digital Extremes finally caved into the reality of their situation and compromised the original vision of their dream game to keep themselves afloat, whilst doing battle and negotiating with the publisher to push back a few absurd demands that varied between overhauling character design to the protagonist having the ability to transform his hand into a spoon so they can fling lava at their enemies. Yeah, apparently that was a real thing at one point in time. Eventually, after sacrificing the sci-fi setting for a contemporary one, DE found a willing partner in Japanese publisher D3, and Dark Sector finally saw release on March 25th, 2008 for Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3.
Hooray! We're off to see a wizard!
Oh, well, you're not starting out very well.
Prior to the game's launch, Digital Extremes released a prequel comic titled Dark Sector Zero. Serving as a piece of promotional marketing material, it aims to set the stage of the world of the game as well as trying to fill in some blanks that, retrospectively, the game itself fails to address. Written by David Wall, prominently known for his works on the Darkness and Witchblade series, and illustrated by Bill Sienkiewicz, a prominent artist in the comic industry, The story is narrated from the perspective of a CIA employee, giving a general rundown on the bleak history of Latvia, a fictional Eastern European country that, after suffering through two world wars, was left in shambles, soon found itself absorbed into the Soviet Union, only later to then suffer a massive pandemic from an unknown virus in 1987, prompting Moscow to dispatch its forces to contain the threat by shooting everyone indiscriminately, calling it a day and officially announcing that the infection had been contained. Unofficially, whispers leaked from Russian spooks claimed that the virus was of US origin, and many years after the fall of the Soviet Union, intel reports claimed the virus was still active in Latvia, prompting the CIA to get very hands-on into investigating it themselves. So, they sent in a team led by a man named Robert Messner, described as a brilliant scientist but with a penchant for putting knowledge and discovery above his and others' safety. Initially, the team was reported to be making progress until abruptly going dark, the agency reporting that Messner has gone insane, whether through infection or psychosis. It's never made clear. As a desperate contingency, the agency sends in his protege, Hayden Tenno, after him, being described by the narrator as mentally unstable, brought on after an incident during an operation that caused him to go over the edge and kill innocents, compelling the agency to imprison him indefinitely. To prepare him to stave off this infection, they give him a vaccine that they weren't sure would work. So, in summary, the CIA sends a crazy man after another crazy man who may or may not be infected with a highly volatile infection into a hostile state, and to prepare the second crazy man to go after the first, they give him a vaccine that is not confirmed to be effective, which, in fairness, would not be the dumbest thing I've read the real CIA has done. At least, they're written competently in character.
Wake up, Tenno.
Time to kick ass. 0 seconds. This is a quote that Steve Sinclair gave during a short developer interview for IGN, reflecting on the game's intended design and philosophy. And the statement resonates earnestly as soon as the main menu appears, the image of the glaive clutched tightly in the hand of an armor-clad fist under dark, brooding skies, the showcasing of the water effect from their in-house proprietary engine, the Evolution engine, beautifully weaving a course across cold, wet steel. The music composed by Keith Power rudely announces itself with a sharp clank of drums before swelling into somber violins. Ominous sounds crawl into the track as if infested, soon rousing a dormant spirit of heroism while still holding on to melancholy. Honestly speaking, the main menu music does a stellar job of painting the vibe of the game, or at least the vibe which I believe the game is meant to convey in retrospect. Anyway, we start the game in Latvia, 1987. A submarine emerges off a coast under a stormy night. A group of boats are dispatched to intercept the anomaly that is that metal leviathan. A man climbs topside, where we have a look at its derelict state. Railings bent, and rust blooms with stoic decay. Shortly after setting foot, his presence is protested with a hostile thumping from within the submarine's bowels. Undeterred by the otherworldly malevolent growl, he pushes forward with apprehension. His flashlight guides his sight until it comes across a massive hole, its edges rent apart like paper. Despite the precarious atmosphere, he pushes forward, shining a light into the abyss, only for something to steer back and lunging onto him where we fade to black. We return to Latvia again, 2 decades since the incident. Our vision is monochromatic and gives the impression of cascading leaves appearing like falling ash. A guard checks in his post in Russian, before swiftly being dispatched by an unknown infiltrator, which, fun fact, is the only Russian we will get to hear the whole game. After murdering the guard, our interloper and protagonist, Hayden Tenno, goes through the motion of post-mortem cold feet. Across several interviews, when asked about the design choices that made Dark Sector, Sinclair would tend to preface his response with a disclaimer about the honesty of the game's development, usually by stating how the game was a far cry from what he wanted. This sentiment, in retrospect, has admittedly shifted how I viewed the prologue and how it expresses its bland mundanity with intent. Literally in your face, from the dullness of the monochromatic filter to the streamlined controls and mechanics and the familiarity of the cold, dilapidated aesthetics. The presentation lulled me into expecting the ordinary. I know what this is. I have played with these control schemes. I have explored environments like these before. It is but a checklist of trends. Regenerating health, 2 weapon slots, a serviceable gunplay, and an art direction comprised of somber and grit, littered with dirty concrete, steel, and debris. I believe this is done on purpose. As Sinclair stated,
we wanted to say, here's something familiar, it's third-person action, you got your guns, your shotguns, your machine pistols, you can mix that up. And then what we wanted to do was have something that differentiated it.
Now, personally, I like Sinclair. He always came across to me as someone who wears his heart on his sleeve. I could trust his intent at face value, even though sometimes the execution doesn't always stick the landing. And when it comes to the story, the notion of time to kick ass 0 seconds doesn't gel well with the overall narrative. The pacing is fast, there is barely room to breathe or a world building to chew on. And this is strange to me because I do see the potential for a better real-life story if it's given a bigger drag of air to breathe. I know, but hear me out on this one. I will do my best to relay a coherent analysis about the plot, while talking about the gameplay elements in parallel, so if you don't want spoilers, go here. Alright then. As Hayden infiltrates the Gulag, he learns more about the technocide disease, how it hardens the flesh of its victims and turns them into mindless feral husks, repelled using a substance called Inferon, which returns as a crafting resource in Warframe 1999 as Effervon, serving almost the same purpose against that game's technocide virus. It is not long when he comes across a soldier executing someone who is suspected to be infected. And fuck it, we don't have stealth mechanics, let's shoot the place up. Eventually, he finds the inside man who's responsible for giving the location of Messner's whereabouts, Victor, bound to a chair, bloodied and battered. Victor explains that the Lazuran military now serves Messner, who is nearby awaiting transport. Just as Victor's about to dump more exposition,
the Lazuran military is working for him now. They've got a chopper coming in. But listen to me. He's trying to get inside the vault. If that happens...
Cold, callous. Yet something interesting happens when Hayden radios in to report to the agency director. The bravado of the cold-blooded killer cracks as he vents about his mental state, stressing that he just wants the mission to be over and return home. The AD nonchalantly brushes it off, layering poorly feigned benevolence as you can almost hear the smirk in his voice as he pushes Hayden to carry on in locating and killing Messner. Walking past Victor's corpse, Hayden cements his detachment, tossing a C4 on his body, patting his shoulder as if it's an inside joke that only he gets. Yeah, honestly these scenes can be wheezing with how much can be put into very little. He proceeds to cut a swath through more soldiers, sprinting past shattered glass, caused by the roar of helicopter fire. The helicopter itself culminates into the game's first boss fight, and checks off from the list of gaming's generic early 2000s trope, with conveniently placed rocket launchers to boot. Nothing much to say here, shoot it 3 times and...
see how you like this. What did they tell you? What did they tell you, Hayden? They said you had gone insane. But they said the same of you, didn't they? Unstable, psychotic, unfit for duty, and yet they still sent you. In spite of the fact that you are so broken. But I can fix you. Do it. Wait. Wait. You know of the lotus, prized as a rare beauty, and yet it blooms amidst filth and decay. Of course, you die in the process. But I think you, of all people, deserve it. Maybe I do.
I wish to talk about Hayden at length here, the kind of character that I think he was aimed to be. From the get-go, he carousels around an array of emotion between each line, from anxiety to guilt, and a hint of martyrdom complex, to concern, to cold-bloodedness. He comes across as a man off-center and far, far from peace. Troubled and on the verge of eruption, someone whose emotional cup is full and is about to spill with a drop. And I commend this fantastic depiction relayed through Michael Rosenbaum's voice work, as well as the rest of the cast, who are able to grasp and reflect these attributes through their dialogue with him. From the impersonal chiding of the AD directing him as just another pawn on the battlefield, Messner calling him out for the husk of a man that he really is, the venomous resentment that Nadia, an old acquaintance, levies in his direction when he meets her, and the compassion that Yargo, another acquaintance he will soon meet, shows, seemingly out of pity. Rather than falling into the stereotype of gruff, capable soldier man trying to come off as cool and edgy, Hayden cuts himself out of that mold by being, as Messner describes, broken. Hayden, to me, is portrayed as capable but intentionally pathetic. And it's a shame, because I can see what Sinclair, who wrote the story, was trying to flesh out. But time was apparently a factor in landing on the intended mark. The lotus, a flower that blooms from mud and symbolizes reincarnation, illustrates the journey Hayden will undertake to evolve out of his trauma and blossom into his whole. In an interview to promote the game, D3 producer Josh Austin was asked about the choice to use a monochromatic filter in the prologue. He stated it was Sinclair's idea, with the inspiration coming from The Wizard of Oz, and this parallel extends further than just the choice of filter. Dark Sector, as relayed by Sinclair, is a superhero origin story with evolution sitting at the center of its theme. It is an arc Hayden goes through, one that is heavy-handed, slapped on the nose during his infection cutscene. And for Warframe, the notion of evolution, trauma, and healing is almost always a central precedence throughout the franchise's narrative. No longer internally stuck in the gray Kansas of his mind after his infection, Hayden instead finds himself on a path to realizing his potential. Like Dorothy, who always had the means to accomplish her tasks with the silver shoes at the beginning of her journey, only realizing it by the end. Hayden embarks on his own yellow-bricked road. The more he assimilates with his infection and embraces it to be a part of him, the more his evolution reflects on his appearance and powers. As the infection subtly shifts from a sickly, rusty ferrite color to a gleaming silver sheen. And such an arc, such a theme, can easily be missed on a playthrough. I personally felt that we were denied the opportunity to truly understand him as that character throughout the game. These moments where he gets to express himself, to me, felt very blink and you'll miss it. Now, in my opinion, a more introspective form of storytelling for Hayden would have benefited the game. It would have given us a foundation and clearer understanding that we are inhabiting the mind of a mentally unstable war veteran, grasping at the straws of his sanity. I would have loved a window to peer into his thoughts, possibly through inner monologue, commentating on the crestfallen world he traverses, a la noir style. Now, I do assent to the importance of show don't tell, but this is one of those cases where I believe a little bit of either was drastically needed to elevate the narrative. Thus, in hindsight, the overall presentation for Hayden as a protagonist comes across as a huge missed opportunity, because there are strong visual cues that could have executed this theme to at least a satisfactory degree. The disgruntled, traumatized, mentally unstable hero living out his worst fear, and just like Dorothy's journey, the metallic infection growing on his skin shines brighter as he begins to embrace his newfound existence, living up to his potential, metaphorically born again past his trauma. Such nuance, unfortunately, becomes never realized or firmly grasped, especially in a single playthrough. After surviving the explosion, Hayden manages to make it to the shores of the Lazarene mainland, his arm now festering with technocyte. He limps his way towards a shack, and through fortune, he finds a ham radio, which he uses to report his status, panic evident in his voice. Not long before having a soldier walk in on him, too weak to hold his own, Hayden quickly finds himself on the back foot, where he's abruptly rescued by the real protagonist of this game. It is really not an exaggeration to call the glaive the star of the show. The game is keen to put an emphasis on that. From its box art to its CD cover to its main menu, the glaive is placed at the focus of this game's universe with great deliberate purpose. In an interview with GameTrailers.com, Sinclair explains that the glaive was conceived by accident during development. Originally intended as a gravity manipulation tool to serve more as a utility within the player's arsenal, the glaive was given its looks to differentiate it from its contemporary that served the same gimmick. However, during testing, a bug occurred where severing a body part with the weapon resulted in a never-ending eruption of gore. This gnarly display of viscera became the team's eureka moment that dictated the tone of the game. As Sinclair stated, it will be dark, harsh, and brutal. This tone, resonating from the glaive, became paramount in dictating how the team would steer the game's art direction, citing how its influence bled into the design of the world building, characters, and narrative. Lead programmer on the game, Glenn Miner, also spoke at length about the challenge of bringing the glaive to the forefront. He referred to the process as a journey, one meant to evoke in the player the sensation of walking the path of a superhero, and how the glaive would serve as a guide on that journey. He cited his desire for the glaive to make the player feel things, but most importantly, feel cool. And I believe they succeeded. Functionally, it is reliable and responsive, and through its introduction, It feels refreshing, washing away the familiar palette of the game's generic gunplay and giving players an avenue for self-expression when approaching combat at opportune moments. It can be thrown around corners and over covers, breaking the monotony of hiding until the player's health regenerates. It guarantees that even when hunkered down, there's still a way to keep the gameplay flowing, especially when players get the ability to pilot the blade mid-flight to manually guide it towards their target. Its impact and feedback are nothing short of visceral and bloody. Limbs can be hacked clean off. Enemies scream in fear upon the imminence of its bite. Glaive also comes with the ability to imbue it with the elements that can leave enemies thunderstruck, frozen, or notified that they've been cordially invited to a Korean barbecue and they're the main course. This utilization of elements also allows the player to manipulate the battlefield to their advantage. Bodies of water that enemies wade through can be electrocuted. Flowing waters from bursted pipes can be frozen into icy pillars to take cover behind. And outside of combat, the glaive also serves as a key in solving puzzles that impede the player's traversal through levels. One of my bigger criticisms for the game is that these puzzles are very few and far between, as I find them genuinely good, creative, and satisfying to solve. Implementing more puzzles centered around the glaive could have tipped the game's score much more favorably, assuming they were as consistently strong as the ones already present. Except for that puzzle, I hated that one. Still, it would have helped flesh out the Legend of Zelda influence that Josh Austin sometimes cites in his interviews as one of the core inspirations behind the game's gameplay design. Speaking of player expression, there are also nuances in technique with how players are able to angle the glaive into performing rewarding trick shots that sucker slices enemies from behind, which always made me smile. Sadly, however, for all the accolades the glaive earns as a strong back carrying the game's combat loop, the journey isn't short enough to keep its novelty alive across an entire playthrough. A gimmick is still a gimmick. This is less a critique aimed at the glaive itself, but more towards the level design and enemy behaviors, which fail to generate enough interesting scenarios to give room for its potential to be expanded upon, and wrestles away the incentive for the player to default to efficient mundanity. And asking players to push through hours of repetition before reaching the good part is, and always will be, a tall order that won't draw a large crowd to support behind. I'll go on a slight tangent here. I found myself enjoying the game mostly towards the end when I finally had access to these aforementioned abilities, and I wanted to test what it would feel like to experience a full playthrough with everything unlocked, to see if I could galvanize my thesis that a longer playthrough with most of the glaive's powers might soften the game's critical shortcomings a little bit. Sadly, even after finishing the game, even on its harder brutal difficulty that unlocks after clearing a playthrough, I never got the chance to test that theory. And this echoes the sentiments Sinclair and Miner voiced during that interview, where they touched on the difficulty of finding the right balance between making the player feel like a badass and making them feel challenged. Unfortunately, that pendulum swung too far in the direction of the former. Dark Sector, to be blunt, is a pretty easy game, even on its hardest difficulty, and it's from this attribute that many of my gripes stem, which I will go into greater detail later. To conclude, the glaive's introduction as a gimmick is stellar. It's a fantastic concept that serves as the focal point of Dark Sector, painting the world, both literally and figuratively, in broad, bloody strokes. But unfortunately, its foundation isn't solid enough to sustain that magic for the entire runtime. As a result, it isn't hurled far enough to ever reach its full potential. Infected, alone, and in over his head, the distressed Hayden soldiers on through the dilapidated husk of the Lateran city. Divorced from benevolence, what evidence of civility it once had has departed among broken streets and withered walls caked with grime, its inhabitants leaving their ghosts as luggages and personal belongings abandoned in haste, and those who are too slow to outrun the infection had their memory commemorated in yellow, bloody hazmat bags strewn about on street corners and alleys, heaped on top of each other like garbage pile, absent of dignity. The only sign of life is the pulse of violence that Hayden thrums through the city's veins as he carves a path through the Lateran military. Eventually, he finds himself in a warehouse, ambushed and facing his most adamant resistance from the military yet. Then, the cacophony of bullets is abruptly superseded by a deafening roar. The sound of gunfire outside is replaced with screams. A large hulking mass barrels towards the soldiers. One by one they are trampled, until this beast, this colossus and Hayden remains. He prepares for the showdown until a loud-pitched noise pierces into his skull. Hayden quickly recollects himself and is met with a sight of ineffable anomaly. Words escape beyond his comprehension as he sees the beast.
Now I have a machine gun. Ho, ho, ho.
Earlier, I stated that Dark Sector's game design is a checklist of trends for games of its time, and one that I wish to highlight is its weapon system. These games usually tend to have a knack for having a lineup of generic arsenal with a complementary upgrade system that tunes these weapons into overpowered territory. We got the pistol, humdrum on its own, but synergizes well with the glaive, great for following up a non-lethal blow with the magnum, with the added nuance of reload cancelling by using the glaive mid-animation, keeping an open avenue for aggressive gameplay. Then there is the magnum, powerful to a fault to the point it can practically skip bosses, but its ammo scarcity keeps it honest. Shotguns are beastly in this game, absolutely liquefies foes, love them, chef's kiss, mwah. And then there is the bolt-action sniper rifle, which brings a bad first impression. It is powerful, but without the accuracy upgrade, Hayden sways drunkenly under the scope, leaving you to fight more with the reticle than with the enemy you are trying to aim at. And it can also highlight the game's awkward collision with cover. And finally, the assault rifle. Now, if the glaive is king, then the AR is god. Great range, reliable accuracy and spread, and even if unupgraded, its damage per second is just too high to a point that it trivializes the game. Interlocking with the fact that headshots are headshots in this game, and with its already generous recoil and spread, you wouldn't be hard-pressed to land them by simply spraying the enemy's upper torso. Now earlier, when I highlighted a few of the glaive's powers, I didn't mention steal. That is the ability to use the glaive to pick up weapons from fallen foes at a distance temporary. And I mean temporary. Dark Sector has this interesting mechanic where weapons used by enemies are attached with an infestation detector that causes it to be rigged to blow shortly after it has come in contact with the technocytes, in other words, by you. And I personally find this arbitrary limitation helps in balancing out the weapon's overpowered attributes, which in my mind could have alleviated the gameplay loop a slight cut above mediocrity when paired with Hayden's movement. Albeit a bit jank, Hayden feels good to play. He's nimble and swift. The controls are responsive enough that having him change position and snake around the battlefield feels almost seamless and smooth, and this induces a layer of potential versatility in approaching combat, switching up styles to suit your situation or approach, whether it's aggressive or prudent, with the added element of the weapon's temporary lifespan that, on paper, adds some spice in the form of the sense of urgency. The point of the matter is both the mechanic of steel and the overtuned weapons open up versatility to gameplay, and the weapon's impermanence ensures that this loop doesn't wrestle away the incentive to use the glaive to a certain degree. Sadly, this ceases and the steel ability itself becomes completely nullified, as early in the game you are given access to the black market, which allows you to acquire a version of these weapons that does not have the detector on them, and thus almost completely sidesteps steel's relevancy. And this convenience of having a permanent two-handed weapon overall hurts this game and causes it to kneel into mundanity. I am sure you heard this quote from Sid Meier about the player's inclination to optimize fun over efficiency if given the opportunity. Well, I'm not going to discuss the pragmatism of self discipline and individual agency over that, but I would be lying to you if I have never admitted having thoughts that went along the lines of, why keep using the glaive? I have a machine gun, ho ho ho. And if it wasn't for the power indicator on my crosshair that reminded me of it, I would have forgotten about steel. So, the bottom line is that the arsenal sits between solid and overpowered, and contributes to discouraging experimentation between using steel and the sensory locked weapons dropped by enemies. And this is a bit of a head scratcher for me, as it circles back to the notion of balance and challenge that was brought up a lot by Sinclair and Miner, citing the effort they had put in for the glaive to be balanced, engaging, and fun without detracting from challenges to be overcome. And having played playthrough restricted to pistol and glaive only, I believe them for the most part. Yet, the tacked on arsenal and their upgrades just dampens the impact of that effort into mediocrity. Speaking of upgrades, the game has an economy in the form of rubles. Players can find stashes and stacks of them lying around to spend in the aforementioned black market, and pick a weapon to accompany them for most of their playthrough. The amount of rubles a player can collect in one playthrough is limited, and out of roughly 10 weapons, well, 8 when you count the improved variant of the assault rifle and shotgun as just upgrades, it is likely that the player would only be able to accrue enough of them to purchase around 3 to 4 weapons at most during a single run. I can see the intent of this limitation, but in the context of a single player campaign that doesn't really offer that much to warrant a second playthrough, the way that both the economy and the weapons upgrade are implemented honestly left a zesty sour taste in my mouth. Putting this in the perspective of playing the game for the first time, blindly, I was not fond to discover the new better weapons are locked behind chapters, and since the black market is only accessible at fixed points throughout the game, this put me in situation where I was either prompted to load a much earlier save because I did not have sufficient funds, because I bought a lower tier weapon at the previous chapter's black market, or wasting upgrades on an inferior version of the weapon class I was using. And upgrades are their own can of worms. Throughout the game, Hayden will come across them in the form of briefcases. They range from your standard fare of faster fire rate, damage boost, and uniquely Inferon laced shells that leaves a cloud which I believe causes damage over time to infected enemies. These upgrades can be installed on your weapon in the black market in the form of slots. One slot per upgrade. And some of these upgrades are rare, very sparsely peppered throughout the game, that if by any chance you have wasted an upgrade you liked on a weapon you didn't wish to be on, let's say in hindsight, it will be a while for you to stumble upon that same upgrade. Even then, you'll have to wait some more till you get to the next black market to install it, where by that point there won't be much of a game left. And I can't help but wonder why such a system had to be so restrictive. If it's balanced, then what is the point? The weapons are reliable at worst. The upgrades themselves do not do much to change gameplay, save for the gun shooting faster or harder. The glaive surely doesn't benefit from it, especially that the two-handed weapons overshadows its inefficient performance. Overall, the stiffness with working with these systems harms the game. There's practically no reason to stifle the voice of the player when they are trying to express how they wish to go through it, partially because this game is not hard, and this is due in major part to I've talked about Hayden interacting with the world, but how does the world interact with him? Dark Sector builds itself as a superhero origin story, and that's reflected in Hayden's evolving arsenal, character, and feature. So, what kind of friction can the enemies put on Hayden to test the momentum of his growth? After all, if the intent is for the player to feel cool or badass, then it is imperative to curate challenges for the player to overcome in order to evoke such sensations. Unfortunately, most enemies in the game falter in giving Hayden a good fight. They come across as generic fodder. Their core design feels more like they dampen the combat rhythm rather than fueling it. And this is partially the fault of the map design that combat takes place in. The combination of both the map layout and the general enemy behavior gives players too much room to breathe away from pressure. The AI doesn't flank or oppress effectively. They sit, peek, and wait for their turn, and in turn, it gives the player little incentive to mobilize and get more creative with their approach. For instance, shotgun enemies are sometimes scripted to rush the player, but dealing with them up close becomes laughable. I never had an instance where I was one-shotted and them being up close means they are just liable to eat a swift headshot as they don't tend to be tanky. Usually in cover shooters, using grenades tend to be utilized as the simplest means to get the player to be mobile, forcing them to take risks. The Lazaran soldiers do this, but they tend to, more often, a lot more often, overthrow their grenades consistently, so much so that I realized unless it bounces off a nearby wall, it is practically safe to stay put and not move from cover. Then there are few variants of melee enemies, designed to flush you from cover, but they've got hitboxes that resemble the arms of T-Rexes, and Hayden's dodge roll is so generous that it practically makes their attacks useless. Enemies with shields are a bit of an exception. They are the only enemies that can reliably force movement, but even they're undermined by how players can interact with the combat arena. To elaborate, most arenas are serviceable and basic, some even good, but players are often given the ability to double back to a previous section, never finding themselves confined mid-level to be forced to actually fight in the arena. And it feels as if every AI is assigned to a dedicated nav mesh, that they wouldn't bother to chase and pressure players who cheese them by doubling back to isolate and handle them without pressure from other enemies. Speaking of melee, even Hayden suffers from the same ailments as the enemy, with its short range, inconsistent detection, and peculiar properties.
Subtlety will not be inherent in this fight. We're gonna see guys bombs that we expect. In the Pride Fighting Championship demolition, and there's that right hand. They're cooking it out. Got right hand.
Minor inconvenience. And when I look at every element of these faults on their own, I could classify them as nitpicky that shouldn't irk me in the grand scheme of what the game tries to represent. But all these issues, these elements, compound into a series of small frustrations that line up to gnaw at me, one after the other, to a point where the frustration feels palpable. And it's the kind of frustration that doesn't stem from painful mediocrity or playing an inherently bad game, but the kind that makes me say aloud, "Come on, Dark Sector, you have something good going on. Just let me play the fucking game. Give me more agency, more ways to voice my expression. Give me a challenge. You are stopping me from potentially having more fun, and it's blatant, and that does not feel nice. I apologize again, but I want to return to that quote about players optimizing the fun out for efficiency. This game is a rare case of me trying to do the opposite and being impeded by design. I mean, there's not even a new game plus or a way to retain progress from prior playthroughs for me to muck about and see how much I could truly yield from this system, seeing if I could realize this potential to some form of fruition. In the Glaive interview, Glenn Miner emphasized how mindful the team were when trying to find the balance between feeling like a badass while not stripping away the challenge to keep it fun. This was exclusive to the Glaive, apparently, as I did run a playthrough on the game's hardest difficulty, no weapons except for using the steel ability, and no upgrades, and the result were a much more realized and positively palpable experience with a much more engaging gameplay. If the limitation was intended to balance, then I am sure the developers had their hearts in the right place, but their eyes were looking elsewhere. I can't speak for the state of the time during development or if the intention to have the assault rifle and shotguns came from digital extremes or were a result of publisher instruction to chase trends. But with context, I can begrudgingly respect the reality of the circumstances. But what I can't excuse are other kinks that could have been ironed out with a few adjustments. An arsenal that is overtuned to overshadow your selling point can be tuned. An arena that suffers from being unconfined can be confined. And an upgrade system and economy that are asphyxiatingly restrictive can be given some breathing room. In the end, these faults hamstring Dark Sector to limp into the territory of mediocrity, and the felt potential that it is only a pace away from manifesting a genuinely fine gameplay experience leaves me with a crestfallen hindsight of what could have been.
Last wish, please, please, please. Last wish. I wish you had more time.
He keeps pushing forward to rendezvous with the CIA's contact Yargo, a colonel in the GRU, and briefs Hayden that the sound wave was emitted by Mesner, who is still alive. Mesner aims to use the sound wave to communicate with the technocyte let loose in the city and corral them for recapture, so he could take them offshore. In order to stop him, Hayden has to destroy the radio transmitter emitting those signals, located within the catacombs found beneath an old church. But before he departs, Yargo provides him with a booster shot to stave off his infection, but for reasons speculated, Hayden decides to stow it away instead. Under the sunset's twilight, he sets off once more, cutting a path through the grimy, dilapidated, and destitute city. Grimy, dilapidated, destitute. These are all common characteristics for an art direction that was made prominent among Dark Sector's contemporaries at the time. And I personally find it unfortunate because even self-contained, even if it wasn't the oversaturated trend back then, the flat and bland art of Dark Sector fails to encapsulate the atmosphere that the game was going for. The grit and darkness of its world was conceived as early as the first showcase of its concept art of the original Unreal Tournament MMO and the E3 2005 trailer. And this fascinates me because it tells me that this tone has been premeditated for a very long time. And it would have given the team ample time to find an edge in understanding how to relay such an art direction that can come across as natural, earnest, and immersive, even if the setting is divorced from the original sci-fi theme. I felt there was an opportunity to have an advantage in conceiving how to generate that atmosphere when translating it to the grounded contemporary world that they compromised on creating. And it is because of that theoretical advantage that the game would have had a chance to become the exception in utilizing such a theme that may have been considered banal at the time. And sadly, the execution of the environment's art leaves many glaring ailments that lumps it along with its peers as a cookie-cutter project that aesthetically blends it with other games of its time, and I attribute these environmental ailments primarily into these three: area, detail, and light. By design, the area that Hayden traverses through is made ugly with purpose, a series of concrete, steel, and stone. It is an object that is flat, cold, imposing, and indifferent. But where Dark Sector aims to bring about a sense of brutality, and I use brutality in relating to the architectural style, it evokes a cold beating heart, and beating heart are the keywords here. My biggest issue with the execution of its map design and layout feels like it serves the purpose of being strictly planned locales for players to fight in, not a place that people lived in. There are jarring detours that lead into wide open spaces off the beaten path that serves absolutely nothing, neither in narrative or gameplay, and it rips that beating heart out entirely, leaving me with a sense of uninspiredness and apathy. There are too many areas that can leave an odd sense of uncanniness in their scale and lack of details, and as a result, generating inconsistency in the impression of the world that the player is going through. And I wish to highlight that I don't want to necessarily grieve on the game for these glaring flaws, because I do sympathize such oversight is most likely due to constraints in time and resources, but this is a product that till this day is sold for money, and once upon a time it was sold at full price. So, regardless of what may have hindered the project to come out the best it could have been, I always felt that part of the creative process in making a video game is to be sold a version that is complete if not competent, and Dark Sector has relayed an intent to give me a world that is tepid and macabre. But the wide areas and the lack of details within them, exposed blatantly due to lighting, makes the game fail in getting me to buy into the world it is trying to sell to me. I apologize for repeating myself. I am frustrated. Frustrated not because of Digital Extreme's artistic pedigree that they have promulgated since 1998, but the artistic pedigree shown within the game itself. Let me tell you about the apartments. You enter that area greeted with silence after following a consistent stream of combat encounters. You wouldn't be at fault if you find your trigger fingers twitching, anticipating foes that might lean over these corners. As you venture further into the foyer, several hostile sensations begin to creep ubiquitously around you simultaneously. Otherworldly noises keep toes firmly pressed to the ground. The sight of a stark raving technocide ghoul sickly protesting your presence with its whispering shriek. A terrible, languid howling from a distance emanating from a leaking gas pipe. The furious buzzing from a broken fuse box behind a closed door, giving off the pretense that a swarm of angry cicadas is nested on the other side. These noises are complemented by the surrounding destruction that foretells that a savage creature rampaged through here. A savage creature still resides here. Moving upwards through the building, the sound of hostile growling and pitter-pattering of feet becomes more prominent in adjacent ruined rooms. This culmination of sensations has admittedly got me tense and looking over my shoulder several times, despite in hindsight there wasn't any real threat, but my anticipation was primed nonetheless. And this level of tension and environmental storytelling will never reach this apex again throughout the entire playthrough, and thinking about it, I then understood that my biggest gripe with the game is potential unrealized. Sure, the series of minute frustrations stacking on top of each other is a remarkable factor for my disdain, but it is really the sparks of brilliance that weren't ignited to its complete realization that majorly lended to my overall frustration the most. This is a competent game that sets out to do what is derived from a checklist of safe and familiar ideas. As a result, it pigeonholes itself into becoming aggressively mediocre, barely keeping its head above water to be a genuine 7 out of 10 game on the shoulder of its few good ideas and design. And deeply reflecting on this, I am reminded of a video that resonated with me from a YouTuber named Micah Edmonds. And at length, he talked about Walt Williams, a prolific video game designer and writer. And what stuck with me is a quote that Edmonds cited from Williams' book Significant Zero. To paraphrase, Williams states that video games can be considered art, but not every individual working on a game, at least I imagine in the context of a team, are artists that are entitled to be handed the privilege of having their own vision thrive like a delicate flower, as the merit of a team's work does not stem from good ideas, but their ability to execute. A team has to be a team, hence everyone needs to know that they can rely on each other, and this involves foregoing the ego of the individual, to swallow their pride in the face of a task that they don't wish to handle because it is far from the intended ideal. Instead, it is important for the individual to overcome their pride and seek the potential within their assigned task, limited as it may be, and bring it to life as if it is the last thing they are ever going to create. And I cite this because I can only imagine how hard it must have been for DE at the time. The genuine earnestness when Sinclair described that period of development as soul-crushing, to be toiling in an atmosphere of uncertainty. Uncertainty if you'll keep the lights on. Uncertainty if you'll find someone who can believe in your vision. Uncertainty if the vision that you compromise will be up to par to the one that you quit on. Uncertainty if the publisher you are working with won't throw a monkey wrench to the development process. Uncertainty if you have enough time to ship it out of the door in a favorable or at least satisfactory state. Uncertainty if the result of all that toil and strife will be the hammer that will break you free from the cycle of the work-for-hire model of development. And I get it. I worked in the gaming industry long enough to bear witness to hard-working, talented people being grounded into dust, long work hours, and months upon months without weekends, with the uncertainty of whether or not the deadline will be met and if the product that you are slipping away on will be any good. I want to be on this game's side. I want to be on the developer's side at the end of the day. But the brutal truth is, I can't excuse this, or that. Because, regardless of the constraint, the game should have embraced them despite the circumstances. As Micah Edmonds highlighted, as Walt Williams entails, part of the creative process is embracing constraint. Life will not handle the ideal situation to make the ideal product. And I truly believe, that this game could have been better, that they had the tools, and what was potentially missing outside of time and resources was leadership. The keen eyes to analyze where their strengths and weaknesses lied and capitalize on it. Because the game itself showed it to me. It proved to me that it could. You see, the best levels in Dark Sector had their 3 core issues with this environment remedied not by addition, but by obfuscation. Those are the chapters that takes place in dim, nearly claustrophobic environments with details shrouded in darkness that leaves room for the player's imagination to fill the void, and could pass off as adequate enough to relay a serviceable immersive atmosphere. Not peak, but just enough, tempering the game's arts issue not by adding more, but by showing less. And what's interesting for me here is that these techniques of concealing the shortcoming is something I associate with the horror genre, and I feel the game's atmosphere is at its best when it tries to lean into being a horror game aesthetically while still being an action game at its core. Whether during loud scuffles or brief intervals of calm where the game's audio scutters quietly in your ears, The darkness and closed space becomes more oppressive with the emotion that it tries to evoke. Areas too wide could have been closed off or obscured with assets to peel away prying eyes from its flaws. One of the most notable assets within the game was with the evolution engine and how they managed to render water so well. It might seem pedantic, but the display of how water flows, how it gushes through breached hulls and pipes, how it rivulets around Hayden's body, how it makes the protruding silver on him shine to a glossy sheen, is a vibe that could have contributed in crafting a distinct impression that would solidify a distinct identity for the game. One thing of note that Sinclair mentioned in his interview about the glaive was regarding restraint, how the designer would focus on slowly divulging the scaling of powers and challenges as the player ventures deeper in their playthrough, so the gameplay can be kept fresh. And I mention this because it tells me there is a degree of consciousness in the implementation of that design philosophy, to curate a cycle of introducing new and interesting elements to keep the progression engaging. Unfortunately, the void between reaching these elements of progression makes me consider if the game's runtime, albeit respectable numerically, may have been too long to its own detriment. Like a breached fuselage, the pressure of its intrigues deflates the longer it keeps going, where Dark Sector would have been recalled possibly as a little game that could, instead of the little game that could have been.
It's empty. The tinsmith forgot to give me a heart. No heart? No heart.
Night falls onto the city, and chaos escalates on the streets of Lasria as technocites and soldiers parley with violence. Hayden trudges between the infighting, silencing their argument with cold steel and hot lead. Eventually making his way to the church, he encounters a gargantuan beast perched like a primate within these once sanctified halls, roaring denial to his advance. With unwavering bravado, Hayden taunts a challenge, and thus engaging in what is the real first boss fight of the game. This is going to be relevant, I swear, but I want to say that I'm a sucker for minimalistic UIs, and Dark Sector opts for a diegetic style of HUD, aiming to relay only the necessary information onto the player as simple and unpretentious as possible. This means of communication extends to the boss fights by not having a dedicated health bar for them. And ideally in such a scenario, it is important to put more emphasis in adding more blatant or nuanced auditory and visual indication that will reflect the player's actions during the fight, whether it's the clear pain state animation, the apparent visualization of physical damage done on the boss, or whatever creative cue that can be administered so that the player can understand that they are or aren't making progress with their actions. And the game succeeds on that aspect, but not all the way through. In the context of the Colossus fight, it does a good job in teaching the player the effectiveness of using fire that will cause the beast to fall from its position, following it up with the opportunity to go up and execute a vicious animation for what is impressionably a large amount of damage. This is good. This is enough to give the message that the player's course of action is effective against the boss. In the second phase, the Colossus ceases to climb the pillars and engages with the player on the ground toe-to-toe, turning the fight into a loop of dodge, burn armor, shoot till it's dead. In addition to spice up the fight, players also have the opportunity to stun it with their glaive, via electricity from a lightning rod that occasionally gets charged on the church's ceiling. In concept, this is a fun idea, providing several avenues to approach what is otherwise a very linear fight. In reality, this caused issues for me. You see, conditioned by the fact that the first phase was more puzzle-oriented than a straight-up DPS check, and in tandem with the boss's large health and stiff animation, aside from burning its armor off, my dumbass interpreted the approach of the fight completely wrong. The lack of feedback and indication of my progress with the boss made me consider if I was doing something wrong, if I was missing a step somewhere. As a result, I unwittingly prolonged the fight, wondering if I had to utilize the lightning rod, for example, as an integral piece of the puzzle. thinking maybe that doing so will stun it and trigger a prompt to execute a special animation like the first phase has taught me. And as the fight stretched onwards, I felt more frustrated, unable to decipher this puzzle, only to have the game smash cut to cutscene to show the boss dying unceremoniously, and upon revelation, I felt very dissatisfied with the outcome. So much so that I reloaded an earlier save to redo this fight again and have it done in the third of the time of the original try, just by burning the armor off and unloading my AK into it. And this feeling of dissatisfaction made me introspect why I felt this way. I've beaten the boss, but why did it feel like a hollow victory despite it not being the case? This made me recall Ralph Koster's book Theory of Fun, where, to paraphrase, the idea of fun in the context of a video game resonates from learning what it teaches you and the catharsis that stems from it validating your action of applying knowledge that the game has taught you, where appropriate. It is one of the indication of good game design, and to its credit, the boss fight did teach me the right things, mostly, but it failed to communicate with me and made me feel like a fool. Perhaps because I was. I'm sure it wasn't the game's intent, and the fight was fine, but it just needed a little more to say to me.
Hey, listen to me. I know why you want to kill him. And now I know why you want to die. Best of luck to both of you.
With the defeat of the Colossus, Hayden's arm momentarily quivers with power, whether through a form of post-mortem technocyte osmosis or an innate life swirling within him, evolving through observed imitation. He attains the ability to form a shield of light that can reflect projectiles back to his enemies. This power greatly expands the gameplay of Dark Sector and gives more flexibility to the player's self-expression, whether to be used in critical moments to save himself from a killing blow, or as a charging Aegis to complement an aggressive playstyle. Now, despite how genuinely refreshing the introduction of Hayden's technocyte powers are, the reason I haven't talked about them in depth in the earlier combat section is the game not challenging me enough to incentivize me using them often, save for a few occasions where they are used as puzzle keys. Dark Sector doesn't do much to make the utility of their presence, well, present. Mostly due to the enemy's stiffness in variety and behavior, to motivate me to think outside of the box and reach into my pocket to pull them out. Regardless, they are a great positive to the game, arguably essential, where I wish that they were attained earlier, with larger challenges that are specifically curated around their usage. It doesn't take long for Hayden to find the radio transmitter in the catacombs. As he sets up the charges to blow it out of commission, he hears the clack of a gun cocking behind him, vying for his attention. Enter Nadia, emerging from the shadows. A CIA operative who has accompanied Messner during his original excursion into Ladria and is now in cahoots with the old madman. There is no greeting, no introduction, only scornful contemplation from her reciting that this moment is how she envisioned their next encounter would look like. A gun trained to the back of his head, followed by cold-blooded execution, an imitation of Hayden's past sin, hearkening to a point in time when he snuffed out the lives of innocents under the pretense of them possibly being infected. But Nadia doesn't buy it, and disdainfully accuses him that they weren't afflicted with the virus, and he was implicit in committing this heinous act out of his own unstable volition. Hayden doesn't put up much of a fight to defend her allegation. His tone is crestfallen, laden with guilt, regret, or both. When he tries to appeal to her to run away and save herself from her crimes and Messner's insanity, she mocks him, for it takes insanity to recognize insanity. Never contesting her, he assents her claim somberly. Her words tear through his paper-thin bravado, and when questioned why she wouldn't just kill him to get this over with, She retorts by stating that her agenda is a mission of retribution, and quelling her vengeance is not the point. She believes in Messner's plan and leaves Hayden to his fate to fight off an invading swarm of infected, impeding his escape from the catacombs that is rigged to soon explode. When I watched the scene for the first time, it felt like I was sitting at a table with two people having a very personal, esoteric conversation, and that genuinely annoyed me. I felt very uninvolved and out of the loop from the lack of context that the story deliberately stays its hand to present for what was clearly meant to be a scene that had significant emotional heft. However, upon subsequent playthroughs and research, I felt more appreciative towards it. Don't get me wrong, I still find the inability to be primed with further context so that I could actually be invested in the scene or its later payoff inexcusable. But I appreciate how much the voice actors try to sell so much with what little they are given. Thanks to Michael Rosenbaum's performance, I can buy Hayden's guilt and concern towards Nadia, and I can buy Nadia's venomous disdain and hatred towards Hayden that drips from Julianne Boucher's excellent line delivery. They aren't long, barely enough to be impressionable, but good enough to leave a genuine believability of both of these characters' history with one another. Hayden escapes from the catacombs in the nick of time. The explosion belches debris behind him as if discontent with his exit. He takes this opportunity to radio the agency and update them on his completed objective, where he is briefed that Messner is alive and has managed to recapture a significant amount of the infected, now caged and stored on a ship off a coast nearby. His next objective is to find a way on that ship, retrieve a sample of the virus within, and destroy it before it escapes into the open sea. He ventures forth, but not before coming across one of the meaner tutorials of the game. Right, I never talked about the Jackal fight that occurs prior to this one. So, the Jackal is a boss in Warframe that players battle in an assassination mission on Venus. The fight is multi-phased, with invulnerable shields, moving lasers, and hold on a second. Sorry. The Jackal is a quad-pedal tank whose concept is directly derived from the original sci-fi Dark Sector shown in the old E3 trailer. And I haven't talked about its first encounter because I felt it shared the same principle as the helicopter fight in the prologue, and didn't find much for me to say about it. Take cover to avoid its constant barrage of its Gatling gun and occasional rockets, find an RPG and rocket laid around its arena, move from cover to cover, pray that its blast damage doesn't get you, and shoot till it's dead. The second Jackal fight, on the other hand, is more puzzle than mini-boss, where the objective is to stun and hijack it to engage with the game's first titular vehicle section. And it sucks. To be blunt, it's boring. It's essentially a turret section with legs, where you are guaranteed to tumble into a mundane loop of taking a few steps, stand your ground, shoot, repeat, with the only legitimate threat are soldiers with rocket launchers, circumvented by spamming flares, and this threat ultimately becomes an addendum to the tedium. Its only saving grace that it is mercifully short. After ditching the Jackal and fighting through the docks, Hayden manages to hitch a ride on a helicopter bound for the ship. Aboard, he makes his way into its bowels. Within, he finds a menagerie of infested, herded like cattle in claustrophobic cages. Tension thickens in the air as Hayden warily treads past them through steel corridors. What was human before growls inhumanely at him. Among the ambience of crunching noises and a strange, sickly squiggling sound that pungently invites discomfort to the senses, he eventually comes across a cage that is abnormally larger than the others. Peering inside, he sees nothing but an invitation for his curiosity. Not heeding his better judgment, he opens it, staring at nothing, but nothing stares back and leaps past him. He staggers rearward and watches as the air around nothing becomes disturbed, materializing into something corporeal to the sight. A savage thing that roars viciously at him before boring into the ship's hull, rending it like tissue. Water now gushes into the ship. It is only a matter of time. Hayden needs to escape. This segment is one that I recall very favorably from my playthrough. It is a timed gauntlet where Hayden needs to escape the ship before it submerges entirely underwater. The pressure is on as he has to fend off infection that obstructs his path, while solving puzzles under pressure. These puzzles are introduced with an adequate escalation in difficulty and, albeit modest, are refreshing enough to shake up the gameplay cycle. My only detraction, in my opinion, is that the time is too generous to induce pressure, making it hard pressed to fail this part on a first try. Regardless, like most things that are good in Dark Sector, as mentioned before, I just wish there were more of them.
This one is very old.
Leaping off the ship, Hayden swims back to shore with his sea legs. Upon returning to land, he receives a distress call from Yargo, telling Hayden that his position is compromised and that it will only be a matter of time till the Latvian soldiers break in. Hayden adjures the old man to hold his position as long as he can while he is en route to his rescue, but Yargo rebukes him, saying that it is unfeasible for him to reach his friend in time and he should save himself. Hayden doesn't comply, marking this the first time where he follows an objective made on his own volition. However, he quickly realizes that he wasn't the only one who has made it out of the ship alive. Enter the Stingers, infected human who, with time, evolved into a more monstrous entity from their former existence. And to me, they serve as the step in the right direction for fleshing out the quality of Dark Sector's combat, forcing the player to make a more engaging and mobile approach with the cover shooting aspect. They are agile, able to leap and change their position effortlessly, with the capability to fire a projectile that resembles a blast from a shotgun. It hits hard, even on normal difficulty, and they simulate the game's torpid approach to its cover shooting mechanics. However, when realizing that even their nav mesh is pretty limited, the player can exploit this by simply backtracking and hunkering down in a safer position, where they don't have to worry about being flanked. Business as usual. Despite this shortcoming, they are still hands down the best enemy to fight, alongside their cousins Chroma, who are stingers but can go invisible. As Hayden closes in on Yargo's hideout, he is abruptly impeded by a figure clad in steel, hulking in stature. This is the Cybersuit Trooper, a Lazarian soldier in power armor, and like all of the Lazarian oriented mini bosses, he wields a Gatling cannon with a rocket launcher attachment. It draws from what was in the old trailer and what will be in Warframe, the design iteration of the Grenier faction. He is the only enemy outside of melee ones who can walk to any cover that Hayden is hiding behind to draw him out, with the caveat that his heft makes him extremely slow and lumbering. Hayden has to dispatch him by shooting off the glowing weak spots found on his shoulders and back, and practically speaking, they are surprisingly underwhelming. Once you figure out the gimmick, they become nigh effortless to deal with. Hayden arrives back at Yarko's hideout, but it's too late. Through a monitor, he watches Yarko being held in captivity by Nadia and a squad of Lazarian soldiers, interrogating him about gaining access to a location called the Vault, where the source of the technosite is believed to be stowed. He reports the situation to the agency and is notified that the handler will be arriving in Lazarus shortly, and that he should cease his rescue attempt and wait for extraction, for his mission is over in their eyes. Hayden doesn't comply and sets off to save his friend, fighting through narrow trainway stations and subway tunnels. It is in these chapters I felt that the game was readily in its element, with the limited space, lack of lighting, and the horror vibes that emerge every now and then. Deep in some labyrinth facility, Hayden finally catches up with Yargo, chair-bound and an eye less from his torture. As Hayden reassures him, it is quickly realized that Yargo was bait, as the monster from the ship appears around him, springing its trap. This creature is labeled as the Stalker, a chroma who also, with the passage of time, evolved into an apex predator. The idea of the Stalker returns once more in Warframe as a form of hunter who randomly spawns and attacks players under the pretense of delivering retribution for bosses conquered by the player in their respective mission. Leaping onto Hayden, it knocks him off a ledge down to shallow waters below. And I got to say, I love the aesthetics of this fight. It's a reference that I point to in regards to the limited tools that the game has that are utilized with efficiency. The dark and tepid ambience of the arena, the heavy and rapid thudding splashes that crescendos as the invisible stalker charges at you, the options that you get to level the playing field with the opportunity to momentarily freeze it in place with the glaive, and how it is able to scurry into the walls to try and catch you off guard. Playing by the rules, it's an interesting yet even tension inducing fight. However, I have an assault rifle.
Here is my throat, begging to be cut.
After defeating the Stalker, Hayden and Yarko make their way out of the facility. But their exit is impeded by Nemesis. A confident Hayden leaps at the opportunity to duke it out with the exoskeleton monstrosity, believing that he has evolved enough to rival it. But reality finds him quickly stricken to the floor. Enter Mesner, looming and hunching over him, goading Hayden to find his throat with steel. As Hayden tries to entertain him, he finds that his body is not willing to strike. Mesner, now powerful enough to assert his influence over those tainted with the technocyte. But Hayden would not see himself subjugated, and injects the booster he stole from earlier directly into his heart. A final middle finger to the man who has been chipping away at his psyche and free will. Looking up at the ceiling with empty, accusing eyes, Hayden lays flatlined, and the disgruntled Mesner leaves him with Nemesis for dead. Darkness fills Hayden's world. Interval passes, and he slowly comes to a bright light flooding his vision. The old man confesses to Hayden that the booster he gave him was laced with Enferon as a form of contingency, for he feared that the technocyte would too turn him mad like Mesner. He continues to explain the truth with the booster, that they were not designed to resist and act against the technocyte, but rather as a primer to have the infection to be received in a more congenial manner by its host body, and explains why, unlike the other infected, Hayden and Mesner were able to assimilate to their new state more amicably than normal and keep their human faculties about them. The expository revelation is halted by the sound of angry metallic thumping and growls. It seems that Nemesis had let loose whatever infected was stowed in this building, and they are now running rampant within this ward. Hayden defeatingly remarks that it doesn't matter since he can't match the Nemesis in battle, but Jargo tells him that there is a solution to close the gap of power disparity between them. Within this facility, there is a convenient power armor just like what the Nemesis is wearing, and with one last gambit, Hayden helps Yargo to escape through the vent and fight his way to fetch it. And upon entering the room where it's located, he closes and locks the door behind him, only to find Nadia peering at him through the vision panel, declaring that Yargo has been recaptured and they will be on their way to open the vault. She departs, and Hayden approaches the terminal to open the Warframe market with enough platinum to purchase the armor. With the armor donned, Hayden takes flight to put a stop to Mesner's madness once and for all. In this part of the story, for me, there is a void to draw from. The speculative symbolism of the lotus is imprinted on the armor as if to say Hayden has blossomed from his broken self into something violently beautiful. Like in The Wizard of Oz, how when Dorothy realized that she always had the power to return home from the beginning, such as the silver on Hayden's body, shining the brightest at this moment, coming to terms with his existence, with his powers, a far cry from the uncertain, shattered husk of a man he was at the beginning of his journey. With steel in his confidence and on his form, Hayden chases Messner and Nadia one final time, the fate of his friend and the rest of the world resting on the edge of his blade. The path he carves leads him to an abandoned factory where his nemesis waits for him for their final duel and penultimate challenge.
Over here.
I consider the fight with the Nemesis as the crux of my thesis for how much potential Dark Sector has had to be something much better than its final iteration. This battle itself is a straight up brawl, and Nemesis, who returns to Warframe as the mind bending Nyx, lives up to her name: aggressive, relentless, deadly, with the wherewithal to punish small mistakes with grand repercussions, able to one shot the player with a swipe of her glaive, even putting them in a helpless situation where they can find themselves stunned long enough for her to deliver a coup de grace before they can recover from their staggered animation. And this fast paced lethality does not feel cheap most of the time. In fact, the tempo is well compatible with Hayden's nimbleness and fluid movements, as he is able to effortlessly dance and dodge around her strikes, as well with opportunities to utilize his power to dampen the pace of her assault. Sinclair stated that the notion of the game is supposed to tell a superhero origin story. Sadly, my overall experience with the game itself did not resonate with said notion. It's less that I feel like a superhero and more of a capable elite soldier with superfluously efficient tools. Except this fight. This made me feel super. Nemesis is the only enemy that truly remedies the lack of challenge that most Hayden's adversaries impose. The only enemy that pushes the player to their limit to showcase his meta-human tenacity. And for what accolade I wave over this fight, it doesn't come without its glaring flaws. Nemesis herself houses a compact array of moveset, and this moveset can come across as sporadic and unintentionally unpredictable. The idea of this fight is to damage her to force her to imbue her glaive with electricity and use that against her to enter a QTE that would flag as the victory state if this process is performed 3 times, where she seems to suffer from stiff animation that doesn't help as an indication to the player if they are making progress with their decision and how they choose to approach her, just as the previous boss. Some tries I would approach her one way and it would progress the fight smoothly. Other times it seems ineffective and inefficient and overall completely random. Regardless of the hiccup, defeating her left me feel whole, challenged, and pleasantly satisfied with a feeling of accomplishment from defeating a worthy foe. Thinking that this tempo, this aggressive approach to the combat, should have been the reference, the blueprint the Dark Sector should have built their foundation upon. The Nemesis fight is Dark Sector.
Nadia. This wasn't supposed to happen.
I'm sorry. I did this to you.
No. Messner was right. I deserve this.
This thing different for you. You were lost before.
I know.
Mesner's down there, in the vault. He's going to call out to them. The vault, it'll broadcast across the world. You have to stop it.
The agency is here. I can't get in the way.
Shh. I know. You'll do the right thing this time.
What do you got, Steve? Hold on, hold on.
Proposal
What do you
for
got?
the pigeon mission.
Proposal for the pigeon mission? We ain't got no budget for pigeon missions. The fuck, are you kidding me?
Vince, the kids. Gotta think of the kids.
Look at the quality of this video. You want enough?
If the Nemesis fight is regarded as the apex of Dark Sector's gameplay experience, then what follows is a swan dive back into painful mediocrity. The last stretch of the game starts off in another Jackal section, which, to reiterate, I find painfully boring. From that point, I had little doubts in my mind that the game is now running on fumes, evident by the bare-bone level design that looks like it has been quickly molded in the engine's map editor, with assets strewn about haphazardly between many wide, empty open spaces. Fortunately, like last time, that section is also mercifully short, but the palpable sensation that pendulums between strained development time and lethargic effort galvanizes itself in the following cutscene. The agency director, who we come to know as Dixon, finally arrives by helicopter to meet up with Hayden at the vault entrance. Now, the dialogue between them is paced at a speed that made my neck hurt. So he tells Hayden that the US government has struck a deal with Mesner out of nowhere, telling him that Hayden's role is now complete and he is permitted to go home. Hayden asks for reconfirmation about this, and Dixon responds to this by immediately chiding Hayden, going on and on about how they are doing things for the greater good, how they are just a pawn on a chessboard, and they are nothing more than an acceptable loss in the grand scheme of things, leaving me confused and question, where the hell did that come from? Alright. Then he gives Hayden a booster, and Hayden responds by stabbing him in the neck with it, telling Dixon that he knows the truth and that he is responsible for the fragile state of mind he found himself in initially. All this while Dixon is choking on his own blood and a slow, agonizing death. The soldiers surrounding the two, elite American soldiers, look on in utter confusion as their commanding officer is simply stabbed right in front of them, before finally having the scene culminate in the trope of the cool burst of power that AoEs everyone around you, but never to actually be used in-game. And so, the game continues for you to fight these soldiers, but something interesting happens as well. In my general critique of combat, I repeatedly criticized how enemy navigation is limited to hunker down around certain cover that the player can exploit and circumvent without almost never needing to worry if they will get flanked. But this time, because of the rushed pace of development, these soldiers are scattered randomly around Hayden, surrounding him. In this arena, there is no room to double back and huddle away. The enemy will move around Hayden for the first time. It was bizarre initially, challenging and strangely refreshing, and felt almost like an accident, to be honest. This also happens in the following combat section against the horde of Stingers and Chroma, who are peppered around in a similar manner. And to tell the truth, I actually enjoyed the erraticism of these enemy placement. The result is that I found these encounters challenging and fun, and pondering about the what-ifs. Venturing further into the vault, Hayden finds and rescues Yargo, telling him to leave and shut the door behind him, accepting that his last venture to stop Mesner is a one-way trip. The trek is lengthy, yet unopposed, save for Mesner's whispers burrowing into Hayden's mind. taunting him and trying to appeal to Hayden to become another voice in the Technocyte's choir. Undeterred, Hayden finds one last major plot twist in the form of the submarine that was shown in the first cutscene of the game. The Technocyte is of American origin. Before reflecting upon this revelation further, Hayden hears Messner's close to his vicinity and finds, to his horror, another late 2000s video game trope, a giant boss fight with glowing weak spots. Messner, now infused into a large amalgamated Technocyte throne, has turned himself into a large 5G tower on the verge to become powerful enough to connect with and control every infected mind across the globe, and evolving into some sort of hive mind brood patriarch. Hayden tries to plead with the last ounce of Messner's humanity. Dixon is dead. Vengeance has been delivered for what has been done to them. Messner doesn't heed. Too far gone, assimilated, lost in the ocean of voices of the Technocyte. Hayden has to put him down. There is nothing more to say here, honestly. It's a large boss with glowing weak spot. We avoid the tentacles. There are QTEs with graceful time to react, and as much I can respect it to be the ultimate test of mastering the glaive, I got a fully upgraded assault rifle. Pop the zits, shoot Messner, do it 3 times, and it's done. Hayden kills Messner, saves the world, leaves the vault, destination unknown, and the game ends.
I shit all over, man. I know. It's not normal. No. Get dressed.
At the end of the day, Dark Sector is, by and large, an extremely mediocre game with some solid ideas that had neither privilege nor time to be fully realized. It's a kind of mediocrity that has evoked a sense of duality within me. On one hand, during sections of my playthrough, I felt that I wished it ended sooner. On the other hand, I wished it would give me more on some of its aspects. It's a game I cannot recommend overall, only perhaps as a curiosity to see how far Digital Extremes has come from. Other than that, whatever novelty it tries to bring in terms of the story or gameplay it tried to portray, you wouldn't have to look hard to find better alternatives that does what it did better. And for that, in a vacuum, it should have suffered the fate of most art that are competent and familiar in its execution, but insignificant to leave a lasting impression. The fate of a stone cast in water. But it didn't, not conventionally at least. The game was marginally successful, but it wasn't the dream that Digital Extremes tried for, nor did it herald the profit they needed to break out of the oppressive work-for-hire cycle. It did help to put their head above water for some time, but not the foundation beneath them to be stable financially. So the contracts kept coming, finding themselves as hired hands for other established projects, such as providing support for the multiplayer for Bioshock 2, developing the sequel for 2007's The Darkness, as well as creating a game tie-in for the Star Trek movie reboot. Working on someone else's dream essentially, someone else's vision. But just like in 1993, when Schmalz's dream pushed him to develop his 3D prototype that ultimately set off a chain of events that led to the creation of the first Unreal in 1998, he never lost faith in his team's dream for Dark Sector. So with what capital the company could accrue, and despite being on the verge of bankruptcy, he gave them the opportunity to venture forth one last time to make their Dark Sector into a reality. A Hail Mary, Digital Extremes do or die. And in 2013, they finally released their dream to the world. Warframe, a looter-shooter MMO about a solar system plunged in turmoil and conflict. Players take on the role of humanoid war machine to tame the chaos. On a grand stage of discordance that takes place across the backdrop of a myriad of environments. Above the red sands of Mars, beneath the amber skies of Jupiter, within the icy mines of Europa, among the stars in frantic space dogfights. And the game itself wasn't a runaway hit from the get-go. It limped into early access, honestly still unrealized and stumbling, yet adapting to each misstep and never falling, keeping the faith, learning from their mistakes, till it culminates as of writing today as one of the highest active MMO on Steam. But what about Dark Sector, the game? Has it had its legacy harkened back after Digital Extremes finally found success? For the longest time since Warframe, it seems that Digital Extremes only relegated that piece of history as an Easter egg, immortalized kinda as an in-game cosmetic, a dark chapter left behind in the annals of their history as a company. That was speculatively the case until the tail end of 2024. On the 13th of December of that year, DE released a major update for Warframe simply titled 1999. The update detours away from the setting's fantastical sci-fi theme to something more contemporary and familiar. And among that is the introduction of the proto-frames, human Warframe hybrids who, unlike their machine cousins, came with their own defined personality and background that players have the opportunity to interact with on a personal and intimate level. A concept and setting that calls back to the original 2008 title, so blatantly so that prior to the update's release, Dark Sector was made free for purchase on Steam to celebrate it. And the key word here is celebrate. You see, the year 1999 for Digital Extremes, to me, was the beginning of a dream, culminating to a thought, culminating to a concept, culminating to a development that eventually culminated to a game. Warframe 1999, the update, is a circle finally coming to a close, a journey ended, a dream came true, a lotus bloomed, and a new chapter unfolding anew. And Dark Sector's legacy, to me, is an inspiring tale of rejection and strife, perspective and growth mindset, risking into the unknown, and most importantly, the virtue to quit on your dream when you're not able to pursue it, but never, ever giving up on it.